The sirens were getting closer. I watched from my kitchen window as 3 patrol cars turned onto our quiet street, their red and blue lights painting the perfect suburban houses in colors of chaos. My wife Sarah stood calmly in our driveway, her hands visible at her sides, watching them approach with the kind of steady composure that only comes from years of training. Karen Williams stood across the street with her arms crossed, that smug expression of victory plastered across her face. She had finally done it. After weeks of surveillance, complaints, and neighborhood drama, she had called the police on my wife for carrying a concealed weapon. What Karen did not know was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. I held my breath as the first officer stepped out of his patrol car and began walking towards Sarah. In less than 42 seconds, everything Karen thought she knew about power and authority was about to crumble right in front of the entire neighborhood. When Sarah and I moved to Willow Creek Estates, we thought we had found paradise. After 15 years of living in the city, dealing with crime scenes and drug busts and domestic violence calls that kept Sarah working until midnight, we wanted nothing more than peace. The kind of peace that comes with tree-lined streets and manicured lawns and neighbors who wave from their front porches. Sarah had earned that peace. 22 years as a police detective, decorated for bravery twice, promoted to lead investigator in the Violent Crimes Unit. She had seen things that would give most people nightmares for the rest of their lives. All she wanted now was to come home to a place where the biggest drama was someone parking their trash cans on the wrong day. That was before we met Karen Williams. Karen lived 3 houses down from us in a pristine colonial with flower boxes that looked like they belonged in a magazine. She had appointed herself as the unofficial sheriff of our little community, armed with a clipboard full of HOA violations and an eagle eye for anything that did not meet her standards of suburban perfection. I first noticed Karen during our second week in the neighborhood. She was standing at the end of her driveway, writing something on that clipboard of hers while staring directly at our house. When I waved, she did not wave back. She just kept writing. Sarah noticed her too, but in the way a professional notices potential problems. Sarah had developed an instinct for reading people after 2 decades of police work. She could spot trouble from a block away, whether it was a suspicious person loitering near a school or a domestic situation about to turn violent. "That woman is going to be a problem," Sarah told me that evening as we unpacked boxes in our kitchen. She was wearing one of her old department t-shirts and jeans, looking like any other suburban wife settling into her new home. Nobody would guess that she carried a service weapon everywhere she went, even off-duty. Department protocol and 22 years of making enemies on the job had taught her that safety never takes a vacation. I laughed it off at first. Karen seemed harmless enough, just another busybody neighbor with too much time on her hands. But Sarah was rarely wrong about people, and within a month I understood exactly what she meant. Karen had already filed complaints against the Johnsons for their Christmas lights staying up too long in January. She had reported the Martinez family for having too many cars in their driveway during their daughter's birthday party. She had even tried to get the elderly Mr. Chen cited for his garden gnomes, claiming they violated the HOA's aesthetic guidelines. But none of those families became Karen's primary target the way we did. Maybe it was because Sarah did not respond to her friendly attempts at neighborhood gossip. Maybe it was because Sarah carried herself with a quiet confidence that Karen mistook for arrogance. Or maybe Karen just sensed that there was something different about my wife, something she could not quite put her finger on but definitely did not like. Sarah never talked about her work at home. She had learned long ago to leave the job at the station, to build walls between her professional life and her personal life. Our neighbors saw a friendly woman who worked downtown and kept to herself. They had no idea that the quiet lady next door had arrested murderers and testified against gang members, and carried a badge that gave her more real authority than Karen could ever imagine. That was exactly how Sarah wanted it. She valued her privacy and her anonymity. After spending her career in the spotlight of courtrooms and crime scenes, she treasured the simple pleasure of being just another neighbor. She wanted to water her garden and walk our dog and live the kind of normal life that her job had never allowed her to have. But Karen Williams was not going to let that happen. Karen had made it her mission to find out everything there was to know about the mysterious woman who had moved into the house with the perfect lawn and the too confident smile. She was about to learn that some mysteries are better left unsolved. The harassment started small, the way these things always do. A violation notice about our trash cans being placed 6 inches too far from the curb. A complaint about our grass being a quarter-inch taller than HOA regulations allowed. A formal letter about our guest parking situation during my sister's weekend visit. I wanted to march over to Karen's house and tell her exactly what I thought about her petty complaints. But Sarah stopped me every time. "Let me handle this," she would say in that calm, measured voice she used when dealing with difficult people. "I know how to deal with bullies." Sarah treated Karen the same way she treated every other civilian complaint that crossed her desk at work. Professional, patient, by the book. She responded to every violation notice with polite explanations and immediate corrections. She never raised her voice, never showed frustration, never gave Karen the dramatic confrontation she seemed to be looking for. This only made Karen more determined. I started noticing Karen outside her house at strange times. Early morning when Sarah left for her morning walks. Late evening when Sarah came home from work. Always with that clipboard, always writing something down. She had turned watching our house into a full-time job. Karen had also recruited allies. Mrs. Patterson from across the street would call her whenever we had visitors. The teenage kid who lived next door to Karen started taking pictures of our property with his phone, probably earning $20 from Karen for each photo. Even sweet old Mrs. Rodriguez began asking me strange questions about Sarah's work schedule and where she went during the day. Sarah noticed the surveillance, of course. How could she not? After 22 years of police work, she could spot a tail from 3 blocks away. But she treated Karen's amateur detective work the same way she treated everything else about Karen, with professional patience and personal detachment. "She is just a lonely woman with too much time on her hands," Sarah told me one evening after Karen had spent 2 hours parked across the street, pretending to read a book while watching our house. "She will get bored and find someone else to bother." But Karen was not getting bored. If anything, she was getting more focused, more obsessed. I could see it in the way she stared at our house, the way she followed Sarah's movements through our front windows, the way she positioned herself to intercept Sarah during her morning walks. That was when Karen made her first real discovery. It happened on a Tuesday morning in March. Sarah was heading out for her usual walk around the neighborhood, wearing her favorite jacket and comfortable walking shoes. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who stayed in excellent physical shape, her posture straight and alert even during something as casual as a morning walk. Karen was waiting at the corner, pretending to check her mailbox. As Sarah walked past, Karen called out a friendly greeting. Sarah responded politely, the way she always did. They exchanged a few words about the weather, about the spring flowers starting to bloom in everyone's yards. But Karen's eyes were not on Sarah's face during that conversation. Karen was studying Sarah's jacket, the way it fit across her shoulders, the way it hung slightly heavier on one side. Karen had been watching Sarah for weeks now, memorizing every detail of her appearance and behavior. And something about that jacket was different, something that made Karen's suspicions crystallize into certainty. Sarah was carrying something under that jacket, something that created a slight bulge near her left hip, something that made her more careful about how she moved and positioned herself during conversations. Karen Williams had finally found the evidence she had been looking for. She just had no idea what that evidence actually meant. That night, Karen called an emergency HOA board meeting. She presented her concerns about having an armed individual living in their peaceful neighborhood. She shared her documentation, her photographs, her detailed observations about suspicious behavior and potential security threats. The board members listened politely, but they were not as enthusiastic about Karen's investigation as she had hoped. Most of them thought she was overreacting, making mountains out of molehills the way she always did. They suggested she talk to Sarah directly about her concerns before taking any drastic action. But Karen was beyond talking. She had moved past the point where reasonable conversation could solve anything. She had convinced herself that Sarah represented a genuine danger to their community, and she was not going to let bureaucratic hesitation put innocent people at risk. Karen Williams was about to escalate this situation to a level that would change everything. She just had no idea how badly she was about to miscalculate. The confrontation happened on a crisp Thursday morning in early April. Sarah was returning from her usual walk, moving at her steady, measured pace through the quiet streets of our neighborhood. The morning sun filtered through the oak trees that lined our street, casting long shadows across the pristine lawns and perfect driveways. Karen was waiting for her. She positioned herself directly in Sarah's path, standing in the middle of the sidewalk with her clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield. Her face wore that expression of righteous determination that had become all too familiar over the past few months. "Sarah, I need to talk to you," Karen announced, her voice carrying that tone of authority she had perfected during her years of HOA enforcement. Sarah stopped walking and looked at Karen with the same polite attention she gave to everyone in our neighborhood. Professional, calm, giving no indication that she found this confrontation anything more than mildly inconvenient. "Good morning, Karen. What can I help you with?" "You can help me by being honest about what you are carrying under that jacket," Karen said, pointing directly at Sarah's left side. "I have been watching you for weeks now, and I know you are armed. I know you are carrying some kind of weapon, and I want to know why." I was watching this confrontation from our kitchen window, my coffee growing cold in my hands as I realized how badly this situation was about to escalate. Sarah's body language had not changed at all. She still stood with that relaxed confidence, her hands visible at her sides, her expression neutral and professional. But I knew my wife well enough to recognize the slight tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible shift in her posture that meant she was calculating risks and preparing for multiple scenarios. Karen had no idea that she was confronting someone with 2 decades of training in de-escalation techniques and crisis management. "Karen, I understand you have concerns," Sarah said in that same calm, measured voice she used with difficult witnesses and hostile suspects. "But I think there might be some misunderstanding here. Why do you not tell me exactly what you think you have observed, and we can discuss it like reasonable neighbors?" This was Sarah giving Karen an opportunity to back down gracefully, to retreat from a confrontation that was only going to end badly for her. It was the same kind of professional courtesy Sarah extended to people who found themselves in over their heads during police investigations. Karen completely missed the warning. I have observed you carrying a concealed weapon in violation of our neighborhood safety policies, Karen declared, her voice rising with each word. I have documented your suspicious behavior, your refusal to engage with community activities, your deliberate attempts to avoid interaction with your neighbors. You are a security threat, and I am not going to stand by and let you endanger innocent families. Sarah's expression did not change, but I could see her making the mental calculations that came automatically after 22 years of police work, assessing the threat level, evaluating her options, deciding how much information to reveal and when. Karen, I need you to understand something, Sarah said, her voice dropping to the kind of quiet intensity that made people listen whether they wanted to or not. You are making accusations based on assumptions and incomplete information. You are creating a problem where none exists. I would strongly suggest that you reconsider your approach here. But Karen was beyond listening to reasonable advice. She had invested too much time and energy in her investigation to back down now. She had convinced herself that she was protecting the neighborhood from a genuine threat, and Sarah's calm responses only confirmed her suspicions that something was being hidden. Are you threatening me? Karen demanded, taking a step closer to Sarah. Because if you are, I want witnesses to hear it. I want everyone to know that the woman living at 412 Maple Street just threatened a neighbor who was asking legitimate questions about community safety. That was when Sarah made her decision. I could see it in the way her shoulders straightened, in the subtle shift from civilian politeness to professional authority. She had given Karen every opportunity to handle this situation reasonably, and Karen had chosen escalation instead. Karen, I am not threatening you, Sarah said, her voice carrying a note of finality that should have warned Karen to stop pushing. But I am telling you that you are making a serious mistake. You are about to create consequences that you are not prepared to handle. I would strongly advise you to walk away from this conversation right now. Karen smiled then, the kind of triumphant smile that people wear when they think they have finally cornered their opponent. The only person who needs to walk away is you, Karen said. Walk away from this neighborhood before I make some phone calls that you really do not want me to make. Sarah nodded slowly, as if Karen had just confirmed something she had been expecting. I see, Sarah said quietly. In that case, Karen, you should do whatever you think you need to do. But when you do it, remember that I gave you every chance to handle this differently. Karen Williams had just declared war on someone who had spent her entire career winning battles that other people did not even know were being fought. She had no idea what she had just set in motion. After the confrontation on the sidewalk, Karen threw herself into her investigation with the intensity of someone who believed she was fighting a war. She converted her dining room into a command center, complete with maps of the neighborhood, photographs of our house taken from various angles, and detailed timelines of Sarah's daily activities. Karen had enlisted the HOA board into what she called a formal security assessment. She presented her evidence at the next board meeting with the confidence of a prosecutor making her closing arguments. Photos of Sarah walking through the neighborhood, documentation of her irregular work schedule, testimony from neighbors about her antisocial behavior and refusal to participate in community events. We have a responsibility to protect this community, Karen told the board members, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had appointed herself as their protector. We cannot ignore clear evidence of a security threat just because we want to avoid confrontation. But the board remained skeptical. Most of them had interacted with Sarah during neighborhood events and found her to be polite, friendly, and completely normal. They thought Karen was overreacting to what was probably just a woman who valued her privacy and worked an unusual schedule. This lukewarm response only fueled Karen's determination. If the HOA board would not take decisive action, she would gather evidence that would force their hand. Karen began following Sarah beyond the boundaries of our neighborhood. She trailed her to the grocery store, to the dry cleaners, to the coffee shop where Sarah sometimes stopped on her way home from work. Karen treated these surveillance operations like military missions, documenting times and locations and interactions with the dedication of a professional investigator. It was during one of these surveillance missions that Karen made her second major discovery. Sarah was at the checkout counter of our local grocery store, paying for her weekly shopping. The cashier was a young man named Tommy who had worked there for several years and recognized most of the regular customers. As he scanned Sarah's items, he noticed something that made him pause. "Excuse me, ma'am," Tommy said quietly, leaning closer to Sarah across the counter. "I just wanted to let you know that I noticed you are carrying. My dad is a retired police officer, so I know the signs. Just wanted to say thank you for your service." Sarah smiled and nodded politely, the way she always did when someone recognized her professional status. She appreciated the respect, but she preferred to keep those interactions brief and private. Karen was standing 3 aisles away, pretending to study the ingredients on a box of cereal while straining to hear every word of this conversation. She could not make out the exact words, but she could see the respectful way the cashier was treating Sarah, the knowing nod they shared, the clear indication that they were discussing something significant. After Sarah left the store, Karen approached Tommy's checkout line with a single pack of gum, hoping to extract more information about what she had witnessed. "That woman who was just here," Karen said casually, "she seemed familiar. Do you know her from somewhere?" Tommy looked confused by the question. "I just know she shops here regularly. Nice lady, always polite." "Did you two know each other from before? It looked like you were having some kind of personal conversation." Tommy's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. After growing up around police officers, he had developed good instincts about when someone was fishing for information they should not have. "No, ma'am, just normal customer service conversation." But Karen had heard enough to confirm her suspicions. The cashier had recognized something about Sarah, something that commanded his respect and indicated some kind of professional connection. Combined with everything else Karen had observed, this interaction provided the final piece of evidence she needed. That evening, Karen spent hours researching concealed carry laws and gun regulations. She printed out articles about armed citizens and security threats and neighborhood safety protocols. She was building a case that would justify the dramatic action she was already planning to take. But Karen's research revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of the situation she was investigating. She read about concealed carry permits and legal gun ownership, and citizens' rights to bear arms. She learned about the training requirements and background checks and legal responsibilities that came with carrying a concealed weapon. What Karen did not research was law enforcement protocols. She did not look into police procedures for off-duty officers. She did not investigate the legal requirements and professional obligations that governed how police officers conducted themselves in their personal lives. Karen saw only what she wanted to see: a dangerous individual who needed to be stopped, a threat to her community that required immediate action. She had no idea that she was actually looking at someone who had dedicated her entire career to protecting people exactly like the neighbors Karen claimed to be defending. By the end of that week, Karen had made her decision. The HOA board was too cautious, too concerned with procedure and protocol to take the decisive action this situation required. If they would not protect the neighborhood, she would do it herself. Karen Williams was about to make a phone call that would change everything. She was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is get exactly what you ask for. It happened on a Saturday morning in late April. Sarah was in our front yard, tending to the flower bed we had planted along our walkway. She was wearing a light sweater and gardening gloves, kneeling beside the colorful tulips and daffodils that had finally begun to bloom after the long winter. I was inside, working on some paperwork at the kitchen table, when I heard Sarah's voice through the open window. She was talking to someone, using that polite but slightly cautious tone she reserved for unexpected interactions with neighbors. Karen had approached Sarah while she was gardening, walking directly across our lawn with that purposeful stride that meant she was on a mission. She was carrying her ever-present clipboard, but this time she also had her phone in her other hand, as if she was prepared to document whatever was about to happen. "Sarah, I need to ask you a direct question," Karen announced, positioning herself between Sarah and our front door. "And I expect a direct answer." Sarah looked up from the flower bed, still kneeling among the tulips but alert to the aggressive tone in Karen's voice. Her gardening gloves were dirty with soil, and there was a smudge of earth on her cheek where she had wiped away sweat. She looked like exactly what she was in that moment, a suburban homeowner enjoying a peaceful Saturday morning in her garden. "What can I help you with, Karen?" "You can help me by admitting what you are carrying under that sweater," Karen said, pointing at Sarah's left side with the same dramatic gesture she had used during their previous confrontation. "I know you are armed. I have evidence. I have witnesses, and I am not going to let you continue endangering this neighborhood." Sarah stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from her gardening gloves with deliberate care. I could see her shifting into the mental state that came automatically after 2 decades of police work, assessing the situation, calculating risks, preparing for whatever was about to happen next. "Karen, we have talked about this before," Sarah said in that calm, professional voice that had diffused countless volatile situations throughout her career. "I think you are making assumptions based on incomplete information. Why do you not tell me exactly what you think you have seen, and we can discuss it rationally?" But Karen was beyond rational discussion. She had spent weeks building up to this moment, convincing herself that she was about to expose a dangerous secret that threatened everyone she cared about. The reasonable, measured tone of Sarah's response only confirmed her belief that she was being manipulated and deceived. "I have seen enough," Karen declared, raising her phone and pointing it at Sarah like a weapon. "I have documented your behavior, your suspicious activities, your refusal to answer direct questions about why you are carrying a concealed weapon in our neighborhood. I have evidence of you threatening me when I asked legitimate questions about community safety." Sarah's expression did not change, but I could see her making the professional calculations that had kept her alive during 22 years of police work. Karen was escalating this situation beyond the point where it could be resolved through conversation and compromise. Sarah was preparing for whatever came next. "Karen, I want you to listen to me very carefully," Sarah said, her voice dropping to the kind of quiet intensity that made people pay attention whether they wanted to or not. "You are about to make a decision that will have consequences you are not prepared to handle. I am giving you one last opportunity to walk away from this situation before you do something you cannot take back." Karen smiled then, the kind of triumphant expression people wear when they think they have finally cornered their opponent and forced them to reveal their true nature. The only person who needs to worry about consequences is you, Karen said, holding up her phone so Sarah could see that she was already dialing. I am calling the police right now to report an armed and dangerous individual who has been threatening neighborhood residents and carrying illegal weapons in violation of our community safety standards. I watched from the kitchen window as Karen's finger pressed the call button. I watched as she raised the phone to her ear and waited for the 911 operator to answer. And I watched as my wife stood perfectly still in our flower garden, surrounded by the bright spring blooms she had been tending just moments before, preparing herself for what was about to become the most dramatic confrontation our quiet neighborhood had ever seen. 911, what is your emergency? The operator's voice was loud enough that I could hear it through the open window. I need to report an armed and dangerous individual, Karen said, her voice carrying the breathless urgency of someone who believed she was calling in a genuine crisis. There is a woman in my neighborhood who has been carrying a concealed weapon and threatening residents. She is at 412 Maple Street right now, and I believe she represents an immediate danger to public safety. Sarah closed her eyes for just a moment, as if she was preparing herself for what was about to happen. When she opened them again, she was no longer the friendly neighbor who had been gardening in her front yard. She was Detective Sarah Martinez, 22-year veteran of the police force, preparing to handle a situation that was about to become very complicated very quickly. In the distance, I could already hear the first sirens beginning to wail. The first patrol car arrived within 4 minutes of Karen's call, then a second, then a third. Our quiet suburban street suddenly looked like the scene of a major crime, with red and blue lights flashing off the windows of every house and neighbors emerging from their front doors to see what was happening. Sarah remained exactly where she had been when Karen made the call, standing calmly in our front yard with her hands visible at her sides. She had not moved toward our house, had not reached for anything, had not done anything that could be interpreted as suspicious or threatening. She waited with the kind of professional composure that comes from years of training in exactly these kinds of situations. Karen positioned herself across the street, surrounded by curious neighbors who had gathered to witness what she clearly expected to be her moment of vindication. She pointed toward Sarah as the officers emerged from their patrol cars, making sure they understood who had been identified as the threat. "That is her," Karen called out, her voice carrying across the street with absolute confidence. "That is the woman I reported. She has been threatening neighbors and carrying weapons in violation of our community safety standards." The lead officer was a tall man in his 40s, with the kind of steady demeanor that suggested years of experience handling complicated situations. He approached Sarah with his hand resting casually on his duty belt, alert but not aggressive, following the protocols for dealing with potentially armed individuals who had not yet demonstrated any hostile intent. "Ma'am, I am Officer Rodriguez with the Metro Police Department," he said, stopping about 10 feet away from Sarah. "We received a call about someone with a weapon at this address. I need you to keep your hands where I can see them and identify yourself." Sarah nodded politely, the same way she had nodded to thousands of citizens during her own career in law enforcement. "Of course, Officer Rodriguez. My name is Detective Sarah Martinez, badge number 4721 with the Metro Police Department. I am going to reach into my jacket very slowly to retrieve my identification." The change in Officer Rodriguez's demeanor was instant and dramatic. His hand moved away from his duty belt. His posture shifted from cautious alertness to professional recognition, and his expression transformed from official wariness to collegial respect. "Detective Martinez," he said, his voice carrying a note of surprise and recognition. "I know that name. You worked the Morrison case last year, right? The armed robbery series downtown." "That is correct," Sarah replied, carefully removing her badge wallet and holding it out for Officer Rodriguez to examine. "I am currently assigned to the Violent Crimes Unit." Officer Rodriguez studied Sarah's credentials for a moment, then looked up at his fellow officers who had been watching this interaction with growing confusion. One of them, a younger woman with sergeant stripes, stepped forward with her own expression of recognition. "Detective Martinez, I attended your presentation on interview techniques at the training academy last fall. You probably do not remember me, but I am Sergeant Collins." "I remember you, Sergeant Collins," Sarah said with a genuine smile. "You asked excellent questions about building rapport with hostile witnesses." Across the street, Karen Williams was watching this exchange with growing bewilderment. The officers she had expected to arrest Sarah were instead treating her like a respected colleague. The dangerous criminal she had reported was apparently known to these officers, and they were speaking to her with the kind of professional courtesy reserved for fellow law enforcement personnel. "I do not understand," Karen called out, her voice carrying a note of desperate confusion. "She has been carrying a weapon. She has been threatening neighborhood residents. I have evidence of suspicious behavior and violations of our community safety standards." Officer Rodriguez turned toward Karen with the patient expression police officers use when dealing with citizens who have misunderstood a situation. "Ma'am, Detective Martinez is a sworn police officer with 22 years of service," he explained, his voice carrying the kind of authoritative clarity that settled confusion and established facts. "She is legally authorized to carry a concealed weapon at all times, both on duty and off duty. This is standard protocol for all law enforcement personnel." "But she threatened me," Karen insisted, her voice rising with the desperation of someone whose carefully constructed narrative was collapsing around her. "She made intimidating statements when I asked her about her suspicious behavior." Sergeant Collins consulted the notes on her clipboard, reviewing the details of Karen's 911 call. "Ma'am, according to your report, Detective Martinez told you that you were making a mistake and advised you to reconsider your approach. Those are not threats. Those sound like reasonable attempts to de-escalate a confrontation." The gathered neighbors were listening to this explanation, with expressions of growing understanding and embarrassment. They were beginning to realize that they had been drawn into a spectacle based on one person's fundamental misunderstanding of legal rights and professional protocols. Sarah stepped forward slightly, addressing the crowd that had gathered to witness what Karen had expected to be her public vindication. "I want everyone to understand that I have never threatened or intimidated anyone in this neighborhood," Sarah said, her voice carrying the calm authority that had made her an effective detective and a respected colleague. "I value my privacy and I prefer to keep my professional life separate from my personal life, but I have never done anything illegal or inappropriate." Officer Rodriguez nodded in agreement, then addressed Karen directly. "Ma'am, filing a false police report is a serious offense. Detective Martinez has done nothing wrong, and your call has resulted in a significant waste of police resources. I strongly suggest that you avoid any further harassment of Detective Martinez or her family." Karen stood frozen in the middle of the street, surrounded by neighbors who were now looking at her with expressions ranging from embarrassment to disapproval. Her moment of triumph had become a public humiliation, witnessed by everyone she had tried to rally to her cause. The officers were preparing to leave when Sergeant Collins turned back toward Sarah with a respectful nod. "Detective Martinez, thank you for your patience with this situation, and thank you for your service to our community." She raised her hand in a crisp salute, followed immediately by Officer Rodriguez and the third officer who had remained silent throughout the exchange. Sarah returned the salute with the dignity and professionalism that had defined her entire career. Karen Williams had called the police on a police officer, and now everyone in the neighborhood knew exactly how badly she had miscalculated. The formal salute from 3 uniformed police officers in the middle of our suburban street created a moment of absolute silence. Every neighbor who had gathered to witness Karen's anticipated triumph stood frozen, processing the complete reversal of everything they thought they understood about this situation. Sarah returned the salute with quiet dignity, then addressed the small crowd that had assembled around our front yard. "I want to take this opportunity to introduce myself properly to everyone," Sarah said, her voice carrying the calm authority that had made her an effective leader throughout her police career. "My name is Detective Sarah Martinez. I have served with the Metro Police Department for 22 years, currently assigned to the Violent Crimes Unit. My husband and I moved to this neighborhood because we value the sense of community and safety that makes this such a wonderful place to live." Mrs. Patterson, our neighbor from across the street, stepped forward with an expression of embarrassment and regret. "Detective Martinez, I owe you an apology," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I let myself get caught up in gossip and suspicion instead of taking the time to get to know you properly. I am sorry for my part in this situation." Other neighbors began stepping forward with their own apologies and expressions of support. The Martinez family from 2 doors down, the young couple who lived next to Karen, even old Mr. Chen, who had been one of Karen's previous targets, approached Sarah with a respectful nod. "We should have welcomed you to the neighborhood instead of listening to rumors and complaints," Mr. Chen said quietly. "Thank you for your service, and thank you for choosing to live among us." Karen remained standing in the middle of the street, watching her network of allies abandon her one by one. The neighbors who had fed her information and supported her investigation were now apologizing to the woman she had convinced them was a threat. Her carefully constructed campaign had collapsed completely, leaving her isolated and exposed. Officer Rodriguez approached Karen with the kind of patient but firm expression that police officers use when delivering consequences to people who have made poor decisions. "Ma'am, I need you to understand the seriousness of what happened here today," he said, his voice carrying official weight. "You filed a false police report about a sworn law enforcement officer. You wasted significant police resources on a situation that could have been resolved with a simple conversation. You created unnecessary tension and conflict in what should be a peaceful community." "But I thought," Karen began, her voice trailing off as she realized that none of her justifications would change the facts of what she had done. "Ma'am, what you thought does not matter," Officer Rodriguez continued. "What matters is that you made accusations without evidence, created problems where none existed, and harassed a police officer who was trying to live quietly in her own neighborhood. I strongly advise you to avoid any further contact with Detective Martinez or her family." Sarah stepped forward then, demonstrating the kind of grace under pressure that had earned her respect throughout her career. "Officer Rodriguez, I do not wish to press charges," Sarah said, her voice carrying the quiet strength that had made her an effective leader in difficult situations. "I think this situation has been educational enough for everyone involved. Sometimes people make mistakes based on fear and misunderstanding. I prefer to focus on building a stronger sense of community rather than pursuing punishment." This gesture of mercy, offered publicly in front of all the neighbors who had witnessed Karen's humiliation, demonstrated exactly the kind of character that made Sarah worthy of wearing a badge. She chose reconciliation over retribution, community healing over personal satisfaction. The police officers departed, leaving behind a neighborhood that had learned valuable lessons about assumptions, authority, and the importance of getting facts before making judgments. The gathered neighbors began dispersing, many of them stopping to speak with Sarah and express their gratitude for her service and their regret about the situation. Karen walked slowly back to her house, her clipboard forgotten in the street where she had dropped it during the confrontation. Her reign as the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer was over, ended not by force or conflict, but by the simple revelation of truth. Over the following weeks, the dynamics of our neighborhood changed completely. Sarah began participating in community events, sharing her expertise about home security and personal safety with neighbors who now appreciated her knowledge and experience. She organized a neighborhood watch program that actually made our community safer, using her professional training to create real security instead of manufactured drama. Karen Williams submitted her resignation from all HOA positions within a month of the incident. She avoided eye contact with Sarah and me whenever our paths crossed, carrying herself with the subdued demeanor of someone who had learned a har.